Have you ever wondered what happens when we die? It's a question that haunts us all, lurking in the shadows of our consciousness. We push it away, distract ourselves with the busyness of life, yet it remains, that quiet whisper reminding us of our mortality. My name is Raymond Moody, and I've spent my lifetime studying death, not as something to fear, but as a doorway to understanding life itself. What I've discovered through decades of research into near-death experiences may forever change how you view both life and death. The evidence suggests something remarkable. Death doesn't take anything away. Instead, it awakens everything. Today, I invite you on a journey beyond the veil of what we think we know, into the profound mystery that awaits us all. This isn't about sensationalism or ghost stories. This is about the transformation of consciousness that occurs when we stand at the threshold between worlds. The thousands of accounts I've collected reveal patterns that transcend culture, religion, and background. Patterns that point to a universal experience of awakening rather than ending. Those who have journeyed to the edge of death and returned tell us of a reality more vibrant than our ordinary perception, a reality where consciousness expands rather than extinguishes. These aren't stories of loss, but stories of finding a greater wholeness, a deeper understanding of who we truly are. As you listen, I invite you to set aside your preconceptions, whether you're a skeptic or a believer. Simply listen with an open heart and mind to what these experiences might be telling us about the nature of existence itself. Perhaps death isn't the thief we've imagined it to be, but rather the revealer of our true essence. Imagine for a moment what it would mean if death were not an ending, but a transition, not a diminishment, but an expansion. How would you live differently today if you knew that death was not your enemy, but your teacher? This is the question that has transformed countless lives throughout my years of research. Those who have glimpsed beyond the veil return fundamentally changed. They no longer fear death, and paradoxically, they embrace life with greater passion and purpose. They tell us that in that moment of letting go, they didn't lose themselves. They found themselves more fully than ever before. In our culture, we've come to view death as the ultimate loss, the great taker that strips away everything we cherish. We resist it, fight it, and spend billions trying to postpone it. But what if our entire understanding is backward? What if death is actually the great revealer, removing the veils that have kept us from seeing who we truly are? This perspective shift doesn't minimize the grief we feel when losing loved ones. That pain is real and necessary, but it does offer a larger context for understanding that transition, suggesting that what appears to be an ending from one perspective may be a beginning from another. The near-death experience shows us that consciousness doesn't seem to diminish as physical systems shut down. Instead, it often expands dramatically. People report heightened awareness, increased clarity, and a sense of knowing that transcends ordinary understanding. They describe moving beyond the limitations of the physical body and experiencing a freedom and wholeness that feels more real than everyday life. One of the most common reports is the life review, where people experience not just memories of their actions, but the emotional impact those actions had on others. Think about the significance of this for a moment. In these experiences, people discover that nothing is lost. Every moment of love, kindness, or cruelty is preserved and understood from a perspective of profound compassion. What seems to matter isn't our achievements or possessions, but the quality of our connections and the love we've expressed or withheld. This brings us to a profound understanding. If death preserves rather than destroys the essence of our experiences, then perhaps what truly matters in life becomes clearer. The near-death experience suggests that we take with us the love we've given, the connections we've nurtured, the wisdom we've gathered, and the person we've become. Everything else, status, wealth, possessions, seems to fall away as insubstantial. If this is true, then death doesn't take anything of real value from us. Instead, it strips away illusion and reveals what has always been most precious. Those who have returned from the threshold speak of a recognition, a remembering of who they truly are beyond their earthly identities. They describe feeling completely known and completely loved, experiencing a sense of belonging and homecoming that transcends anything they've known in physical life. This suggests that death may actually reveal, rather than destroy, our authentic self. What would it mean to live with this understanding? How might it transform your priorities, your relationships, your sense of purpose? The evidence from near-death experiences suggests that we don't need to wait for death to benefit from its wisdom. We can begin now to focus on what truly matters, cultivating love, presence, forgiveness, and wonder. We can start releasing our attachment to the temporary and embracing what endures. The most profound lesson from the study of near-death experiences may be that death serves as the ultimate teacher of how to live. By contemplating our mortality, not with fear but with curiosity and openness, we can align our lives more fully with what will ultimately matter most. The wisdom I've gathered from working with thousands who've touched death's edge reveals a surprising truth. Death isn't what we think. It doesn't diminish us. It illuminates everything we truly are. The near-death experience consistently shows us that consciousness doesn't fade as the body fails. It expands into something greater, clearer, and more whole than our everyday awareness. People describe moving beyond the confines of physical existence into a state where understanding flows without effort, where love becomes tangible, and where the artificial boundaries we construct during life dissolve into something more authentic. This transformation of consciousness challenges our most fundamental assumptions about reality. What if death isn't the thief we fear, but the revealer of our deepest nature? What if it doesn't take away, but rather strips away the illusions that have kept us from recognizing who we truly are? This isn't wishful thinking or religious doctrine. It emerges from consistent patterns in thousands of accounts across cultures and belief systems. The transformation these experiences trigger often changes lives permanently. People who have glimpsed beyond the veil typically lose their fear of death, but paradoxically, they embrace life with greater intensity and purpose. They prioritize love and compassion over material success. They develop a sense of mission, a desire to grow spiritually, and an appreciation for the present moment that wasn't there before. These changes aren't the result of a belief imposed, but an experience that fundamentally shifts perception. One woman described it to me this way. Before my experience, I thought of myself primarily as a physical being, occasionally having spiritual experiences. Afterward, I understood I am a spiritual being having a physical experience. This profound reversal of perspective reveals itself again and again. Another common element is the life review, where people re-experience not just their actions, but their emotional impact on others. Every kindness, every hurt inflicted, nothing is lost. In this panoramic review, they experience their lives from multiple perspectives simultaneously, including the feelings of those they've interacted with. This suggests something remarkable about consciousness, that it preserves and integrates experiences rather than losing them. Rather than narrowing at death, awareness expands to encompass more truth, not less. This brings us to perhaps the most compelling evidence that death reveals rather than diminishes, the consistent reports of feeling more real than real. Those who have crossed the threshold often struggle to convey the vivid, hyper-real quality of the experience. They describe colors more vibrant than anything on earth, understanding more direct than thought, and love more profound than our strongest earthly connections. This enhanced reality challenges the assumption that consciousness is merely a product of brain activity. If that were true, we would expect diminishing awareness as the brain shuts down, not this dramatic expansion that so many report. Consider what this might mean. If the most real experience of your existence occurs when your physical brain is least functional, perhaps consciousness isn't produced by the brain, but rather channeled through it, like light through a prism. The brain might be more like a receiver or a filter than a producer of consciousness. This would explain why, as that filter relaxes its grip, experience becomes more expansive rather than contracting into nothingness. The implications are profound. If death reveals rather than destroys who we are, then our authentic self isn't the temporary, skin-encapsulated ego we typically identify with. Our true nature may be something far more expansive, connected, and enduring than our everyday awareness suggests. Those who have glimpsed this larger self often speak of recognizing it, not discovering something new, but remembering something forgotten, like awakening from a dream into a more real state. This awakening quality is significant. Throughout human history and across spiritual traditions, We find the metaphor of life as a kind of sleep or forgetting, and spiritual awakening as remembering our true nature. The near-death experience suggests this isn't merely poetic language, but points to something fundamental about consciousness itself. When we understand death as revealer rather than destroyer, our entire relationship with mortality transforms. Instead of an adversary to be feared and postponed, death becomes a teacher whose wisdom we can integrate into life. After all, if death ultimately strips away everything but the essence of who we are and what we've loved, why wait? We can begin now to release our attachment to the temporary and align ourselves more fully with what endures. This shift in perspective doesn't trivialize grief. When we lose someone we love, the pain is real and necessary. It honors the bond we shared. But understanding death as revealer rather than destroyer offers a larger context for that grief. Perhaps what we're grieving isn't their non-existence, but our temporary separation, our inability to continue the relationship in familiar ways. This perspective aligns with what those who've returned from death's threshold consistently report: a sense of continued existence, expanded awareness, and profound connection that transcends physical boundaries. They describe encountering deceased loved ones not as ghosts or diminished versions of themselves, but as fully present, often more vibrant and whole than they were in physical life. This suggests that what death reveals is not only our own authentic nature, but the enduring essence of our relationships. The love we've shared doesn't disappear but is preserved and clarified, freed from the limitations and misunderstandings that sometimes cloud human connections. In my decades of research, I've been struck by how consistent these elements remain across cultures, religions, and backgrounds. Whether the experiencer is Christian or Buddhist, atheist or agnostic, the core elements persist: the sense of expanded consciousness, profound love, life review, and recognition of a deeper reality. This universality suggests we're touching something fundamental about human existence, perhaps discovering the territory that gave rise to spiritual traditions in the first place. Of course, skeptics offer various explanations for these experiences: oxygen deprivation, chemical changes in the dying brain, hallucinations triggered by trauma. These perspectives deserve serious consideration, but they often fail to account for the consistency of the experiences, their transformative impact, and especially the verified reports of awareness during periods of complete brain inactivity. Something more seems to be happening. Even more challenging for purely material explanations are the verified accounts of accurate perception during these experiences, cases where people report witnessing events or conversations occurring at a distance from their unconscious bodies, details that are later confirmed. These veridical perceptions suggest that consciousness may temporarily operate independently of the physical brain, perceiving in ways that challenge our conventional understanding of mind and matter. But whether you view these experiences through a spiritual or scientific lens, their implications for how we live remain powerful. If death ultimately reveals, rather than destroys what matters most, then we can learn to live more authentically by contemplating what death might teach us. Imagine approaching the end of your life and looking back. What will matter then? What will you wish you had paid more attention to? What will seem like wasted energy and focus? The near-death experience suggests that relationships, love expressed, wisdom gained, and personal growth will matter far more than achievements, possessions, or status. This isn't to say those things have no value, but rather that their value is instrumental rather than intrinsic. They matter to the extent they support what ultimately matters. I've observed that those who integrate the lessons of near-death experiences into their lives focus more on qualities like forgiveness, compassion, and presence. They recognize the preciousness of each moment rather than postponing life for some future that may never arrive. They understand that we don't need to wait until death to release what doesn't serve our deeper nature. We can begin now to live more authentically, more aligned with what ultimately matters. This brings us to perhaps the most powerful revelation from near-death experiences: the encounter with unconditional love. Experiencers consistently report feeling completely known and completely loved, accepted without judgment despite full awareness of their mistakes and shortcomings. This profound acceptance often becomes the cornerstone of their transformed outlook. If we are, at our essence, beings worthy of such love, then perhaps we can begin extending that same compassion to ourselves and others. Perhaps the fear and judgment that often poison human relationships can be recognized as part of the illusion that death will ultimately strip away. When we glimpse our shared essence beyond the boundaries of personality and belief, compassion arises naturally. These findings suggest something revolutionary about human potential. If death reveals rather than destroys our true nature, then authentic living might involve a gradual awakening to that nature here and now. We might view life as a journey of remembering rather than acquiring, of uncovering rather than achieving, of becoming more fully what we already are at the deepest level. What if we've misunderstood the very nature of transformation? We often think of spiritual growth as a process of becoming something different, something better. But what the near-death experience suggests is quite the opposite. That transformation is actually a process of revealing what has always been there, beneath the layers of conditioning, fear, and limitation that we've accumulated. Death in this understanding isn't transformation through destruction, but transformation through revelation. It doesn't change us into something else. It unveils who we truly are. This perspective changes everything. It means that the wisdom, compassion, and expanded awareness that people report in near-death experiences aren't alien states imposed from outside, but our natural condition when the veils are lifted. Our authentic self isn't something we need to construct or achieve. It's what remains when everything temporary and artificial falls away. The implication is profound. We don't need to wait for death to experience this unveiling. Through contemplation, meditation, compassionate action, and letting go of what doesn't serve our deeper nature, we can begin the process of revelation now. Many spiritual traditions have recognized this truth. The Christian mystics speak of dying before you die. Buddhist teachings emphasize emptying the self to discover what remains. Indigenous wisdom traditions worldwide include rituals of symbolic death and rebirth. These diverse paths point to the same understanding, that by releasing our attachment to the temporary, we reveal the eternal. The irony is that in our culture's desperate attempt to avoid death at all costs, we may be postponing the very revelation that would free us from fear. By refusing to contemplate our mortality, we remain trapped in the illusion that our temporary identities and possessions define us. We chase security and permanence where none can be found, missing the deeper security of recognizing our true nature. Those who've had near-death experiences often describe them as more real than real. This heightened reality isn't a hallucination, but a glimpse of what exists when the filters of ordinary perception are removed. It suggests that what we call normal consciousness might actually be the reduced state. Consciousness constricted by the limitations of physical existence and egocentric perception. Perhaps ordinary awareness is like viewing reality through a keyhole, while the near-death experience throws open the door. This opening reveals not just a different perspective, but a different mode of knowing. Beyond conceptual understanding, beyond belief, experiencers describe direct perception of interconnection, meaning, and the sacred nature of existence. This knowing transcends the duality of our everyday thinking, embracing paradox and multiplicity in ways that our linear minds struggle to comprehend. That's why those who return often struggle to put their experiences into words. Language itself is based on the dualistic categories of ordinary consciousness. How do you describe an experience of being simultaneously yourself and everything else? How do you convey understanding without thought, presence beyond time, or love that transcends all conditions? The limitations of language explain why the wisdom of near-death experiences often sounds paradoxical. Death brings greater life. Letting go leads to receiving. The dissolution of self reveals a greater self. These aren't contradictions, but reflections of a reality that transcends our usual either-or thinking. They point to a both-and universe of astonishing inclusivity and connectedness. What's most remarkable about these revelations is their transformative power. Those who integrate the near-death experience typically don't just change their beliefs, they change their lives. They prioritize love over achievement, presence over planning, compassion over judgment. They lose interest in material accumulation and status seeking, turning instead towards service, creativity, and authentic connection. This transformation isn't the result of willpower or discipline. It flows naturally from a genuine shift in perception. Once you've glimpsed a larger reality, the constraints of the smaller one no longer bind you in the same way. You begin living from a different center, motivated by love rather than fear, by contribution rather than acquisition. This is the great revelation that death offers, not that we cease to exist, but that we exist more fully when we release our attachment to the temporary self. Not that we lose what matters, but that we discover what has always mattered most. Not that consciousness ends, but that it expands beyond the boundaries we've accepted as real. This wisdom from near-death experiences invites us to consider a radical possibility. What if death isn't an ending but a beginning? What if it doesn't diminish consciousness but expands it? The consistent patterns in thousands of accounts suggest that as physical systems shut down, something opens up, a wider perception, a deeper knowing, a more authentic mode of being. This opening isn't random or chaotic, but reveals an underlying order and meaning that many describe as more real than physical existence. We might think of physical life as a necessary narrowing of consciousness, a focusing of attention that allows for certain kinds of experiences and learning. Death then becomes not a failure or tragedy, but the natural expansion back into a fuller reality. This doesn't mean physical life lacks value, quite the opposite. These experiences suggest that our time here matters profoundly, not for the accolades or possessions we accumulate, but for the love we express, the wisdom we embody, and the growth we undergo. The life review that so many report suggests that nothing meaningful is lost. Every act of kindness, every moment of presence, every instance where we choose love over fear, all are preserved and understood in their full significance. Perhaps the greatest gift of these experiences is the recognition that we don't need to wait for death to benefit from its wisdom. We can begin now to align our lives with what ultimately matters. We can practice dying before we die, not in any morbid sense, but in the sense of gradually releasing our attachment to the temporary and embracing what endures. This might involve simple practices like taking time each day for stillness and reflection, cultivating gratitude for the miracle of existence, practicing forgiveness toward yourself and others, or asking in challenging moments, will this matter when I'm dying? Such questions help us cut through the noise and confusion of daily life to what truly deserves our attention and energy. The near-death experience also challenges us to reconsider our relationship with loved ones who have died. If consciousness continues and expands rather than ending, then death doesn't sever our connection. It transforms it. Many who have had these experiences report ongoing awareness of and communication with deceased loved ones, not as wishful thinking but as direct perception. This doesn't mean we shouldn't grieve. Grief honors the physical relationship that has changed, but understanding death as revealer rather than destroyer offers a larger context for that grief, suggesting that the essence of our relationships continues beyond physical separation. Perhaps most profoundly, the near-death experience invites us to reconsider who we are at the most fundamental level. If death reveals rather than destroys our true nature, then we are not merely physical beings having occasional spiritual experiences, but spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience. Our authentic self isn't limited by the boundaries of skin or the span of years, but participates in something far more expansive and enduring. This recognition doesn't diminish the importance of our earthly journey, but places it within a larger context of meaning and purpose. The patterns that emerge from thousands of near-death experiences suggest that we are here to love, to learn, to grow in wisdom and compassion, and that nothing of real value is ever lost. Death, in this understanding, becomes not the enemy of life, but its ally, not the end of consciousness, but its liberation. It doesn't take anything away that truly matters. Instead, it reveals everything essential that we already are. As you contemplate these possibilities, I invite you to consider how this perspective might transform your own relationship with life and death. What would change if you knew with certainty that death reveals rather than destroys who you are? How might you live differently today? What would you release, and what would you embrace more fully? The wisdom of those who have glimpsed beyond the veil suggests that we need not wait for death to live with greater authenticity, presence, and love. We can begin now to align ourselves with what ultimately matters, to live as if death were not our enemy, but our teacher, revealing with each passing moment the precious truth of who we really are.